Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, Technical Evangelist at CTC, and today I would like to share with you project activity logging in HIVE, and I want to try to give you all of the possible information that you could need to be able to set it up in your company and to be able to understand the reporting and get it running for yourselves. So to be able to use project activity in HIVE, really all you need is a HIVE license. But before we really dig into project activity logging, I want to talk a little bit about why project activity logging. I mean, our project models, they hold all of our work. The problem is, as people are working in these models, they begin to start to degrade in performance. They can start responding more slowly, they open slow, they save slow, they navigate slow, and sometimes they even become corrupted. Now, when that happens, of course, you got to drop your work as a BIM manager, and you got to help resolve that because that team is trying to work and they can't when the project model doesn't open. So the project activity logger, or PAL, you'll hear me call it PAL a lot today for HIVE, this allows you to really easily track the performance of the models and start to understand some issues that might arise really before the team is even affected by them. So you can be way more proactive about handling these model issues, and in a lot of cases the team doesn't experience some of these crashes if you stay on top of this. So I want to show you today how you can leverage these reports, and again, if you have HIVE, the content management system, you've got access to these tools I'm going to talk about today. And so I'm going to show you how to set up specifically the project activity logger within HIVE. We're going to go through a couple of major things. How you can get access to the management portal. This is an important first step in some of your setup. We're going to configure some basic settings for project logging so that you know what kind of data you can expect. We're going to actually set up the environment, and then we're going to explore some of the available reports. I'm going to show you this thing doing some logging as I open and save a project model. And we'll also talk a little bit about how you might leverage these things, these bits of information, to take some preventative actions prior to your models having some major difficulties. I want to be very clear about today's discussion. This is very much a BIM management focused discussion. As an end user, while this is running on your computer, you won't really see anything. It doesn't affect you. It just works in the background. But as BIM managers, we have to set this up right so that our end users don't experience any problems, and so they don't see anything that's going on. The whole point is it's silent. They can't shut it off. It's just there. So let's take a look at how all of this works. There's a couple of major steps that I go through. As I mentioned before, I like to log into the management portal, take a look at the project settings, and I like to get my PAL configuration file. It's really my step one. There is some installation that goes on the computers, and I try to do that as early as I can right after that PAL configuration file is acquired. That way, information starts getting logged into the HIVE environment. You also need to make sure you create projects, these logical buckets. Now, you're not creating Revit project models because Revit project models are associated to a project, and all we're doing is telling the HIVE project activity environment which Revit models are related to each other in a project. Sometimes, many of us work in multidisciplinary firms where we've got an architectural model and a structural model and an MEP models. Sometimes, in our firm, maybe we're only one discipline, but we work on large models, and there are, an architectural core and shell model and an architectural interiors model. Maybe sometimes on different wings of the building, we might break those apart. And it's all architecture, or it's all one discipline, but we break them apart. And so there's multiple models that are a part of a single project. And that is the project creation process to help us deal with that. And the third step there, the path mapping, to make sure that those paths from those models are recognized by that project so they logically group. And there's group configuration, which is allowing the project teams to gain access to the project activity data. This is where end users come into play. Maybe you want them to see the reports about these projects. Maybe you want project managers to be able to see their projects and kind of be proactive themselves before you even need to get involved as a BIM manager. This is how they can actually see some of that by leveraging that group configuration. So you know what? Before we go too far, let's dig in live and take a look at how this works. Step one is the management portal. And you can access this on any web-enabled device. Your smartphone, your tablet, your desktop computer. Just go to that HTTPS address. Another easy way to get here if you want is to leverage the HIVE content management system. And if you're a BIM admin, you're logged in as an administrator, there's a management portal button right on the home page. You can get directly access to this as well. I'm already there. I've pulled it up on my computer. Here is my management portal sitting out here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so it covers up the rest of the page. Good Lord, those are small little areas there to grab. All right. So on this management portal here, let's just maximize it. Why not? In this environment, if you're dealing with projects, the whole point of today's discussion is to talk about projects, then when you're signed in, you should have a projects tab. You get access to this tab by either being a company administrator, an organizational admin actually. So over here in users and groups, underneath my users for me, if I go to myself here, you will notice that my role is organization admin. That means I have full rights to everything, including the projects tab. Not everybody will have that. Some of you might only be a CMS admin, which means you'll only see the CMS tab. Or some of you might only be a projects admin, which means you won't see a lot of the rest of these tabs, but you'll just see projects. That's okay. If you're an organization admin or if you're a project admin, you'll have that projects tab and you can do the administration that I'm about to show you right now. So here in projects, that very first step that I mentioned was to go down into settings. And I recommend that you change your project settings first. You don't technically have to. That's not required. You can change your mind on these settings anytime in the future. When you download the config file, part of that first step, it is not downloading these settings. It's downloading a connection to your company information so that when you're logged in, you're seeing your projects. When your users are logging data, it's logging to your company, to your HIVE instance. This config file is not related to this. It's just on the settings page, so you can get all the settings you need. Change your settings and get your config in one spot. Change these whenever you want to. There's a couple of things I do recommend that you check, though. I recommend that you turn on Revit add-ins. This, sometimes, as a BIM manager, can be an indication of problems. Sometimes add-ins conflict with each other. Sometimes a user might have an outdated add-in that might be causing problems. This will help you discover that. Logging audits when models are opened. You know, I don't have Revit open right now, but let's open it up. When I open up Revit, any version of Revit 2018 through 2021 with the HIVE project activity logger, this will allow you the ability when you're opening a project with that setting checked about logging audits to see if they simply check the button, audit this project. If you're seeing over time that they haven't been doing that, then it might be a good idea to talk to that team about doing that. Where do you see that? Well, when you're in the open process here and you go to Revit models or whatever your path is, you grab a project, there's that audit checkbox. People don't often check this because as soon as they do, Revit gives them a message that says, this can take a long time. This is, however, recommended for periodic maintenance. When was the last time an audit was checked? Well, you might want to know that. So do you want to continue? I usually audit about once a week, once every other week. And if the more frequently you audit, the less time it takes because it's already nice, neat, and clean. Just like when you sync to central, if you compact every time, it's not slow because it's already compacted mostly. You're just doing minor compacts here and there. So we'll come back to that in a minute here. Back on that website here, that's what the log audits when opening models gets kind of logged. Do you want to log the switching of views? I like this one. This tells me how responsive the model is as a whole. If I switch from a normal view to an elevation, like a floor plan to an elevation view, how long does that view take to actually regenerate? When you switch to a sheet, how long does that sheet take to regenerate? That sometimes can be an indication of a lot of extra 3D modeling, a lot of extra detail, or a lot of unnecessariness in the model. That view switching there, if you know how long that view switching takes, that can be meaningful. Do you want to log printing from Revit when somebody actually clicks the print button, or when they actually run say our batch print plotter exporter command? Do you want to log that kind of stuff? Do you want to log activity from non-work shared models? This means all Revit model activity will be logged. Shared, work sharing enabled, and not work sharing enabled. Now, if you're a company who doesn't do work sharing, if you're a residential firm and you work on your own individual models and you don't share work, you don't enable work sharing, well, then you'd want to check this if you want any kind of metrics on your model. If you're a corporation that is almost always doing work sharing, you're working in BIM 360, you're collaborating with other individuals, and you very rarely work on non-work shared models, maybe you don't care about the little side projects and side small models that are opened sometimes on a daily basis. Maybe it's, I don't know, warehouse files that are not work shared or something. It's up to you whether you want to capture these or not. I've chosen not to because all the models that I care about demonstrating and working with are all work shared. So I have this disabled. This just gives you more paths to worry about. And if you don't care about non-work shared models, then whatever. You also have an option down here about warnings, summarized warnings or detailed warnings. Now, my personal recommendation to you is go with summarized. It gives you the warning types all grouped together by title, and then it lists all the instances in a separate column of that's related to that particular warning by element ID. I think, at least for me, that's more meaningful than seeing every instance listed with its warning and description, right? So I don't do this. Your choice. Obviously, that's why it's an option here in the settings. You can choose, and you can always change your mind later on if you're like, oh no, I want more detail. Well, detailed warnings, and then you start to acquire more detailed information. I will also say summarized warnings, especially if you have a lot of warnings in your projects, is faster to get up into the system. It's lighter weight for you to retrieve those warnings back later when you want to get a report. It's a lot faster performant for you. If you don't mind having all the element IDs grouped together, fantastic. I'll show you an example of a summarized warning. Well, maybe I can't today, but we will talk about that in a future webinar. So get these things modified, save your settings. You're good to go. That'll keep those settings saved. And then also make sure you download the config. This will get downloaded into your downloads folder. You can see this is the 4th time I've done this. The first time it was called hiveconfig.json. Now, since I've done it 3 more times, I got parenthesis 1, parenthesis 2, and parenthesis 3. But this file needs to be called hiveconfig.json. And when you install the actual project activity logger portion, the HIVE PAL tool, you put this file in a very specific location. I'm going to show you exactly where to put this file. Once you install any of the CTC tools on a computer, you will get C drive, program data, CTC licensing. This folder will exist when you've got CTC tools. And you simply put the hiveconfig.json in that folder, and then the PAL tool now knows exactly where to store the information when it's writing to the cloud. That's all you got to do. Put the file there. So you install PAL, and you put the hiveconfig.json here, and you're done. You're done with the setup of the Hive of the project activity logger. It's really that easy. And the tool that I'm talking about installing here, I'm going to pull across another window. When you extract the Hive zip file from our website, there are 2 installations. There's the Hive CTC Hive setup.msi. This is the CMS. The CTC Hive PAL setup, the project activity logger, this is an optional install. This is the part we're talking about in today's webinar. This one right here is the one that does the logging, and this is the one that looks at this hiveconfig.json file, okay? That's what you want to get. With that, when you install this, and install silently if you want to. You can install this silently real easy. In fact, in the Hive Project Analytics installation right there, it'll tell you exactly how to install this silently. And if you want to, you can push this file out with that. It's a basic script, MSI. I forget what exactly it is. It's in the document. You put it, you tell it -I, you install this MSI and /Q, it installs it silently, and right after that, you copy the JSON file to the CTC licensing folder. Then on everybody's computer, everybody who's got Revit, and PAL is set up and starting to log. Every time they open up Revit 2018 through 2021, it will start logging data into the Hive environment. That's the first part of your setup. You're done. So step 1, config, get your config file. Do your settings, get your config file. Step 2, install PAL everywhere on everybody's computer and push that config file out to all their computers. Your next step is simply going to be sitting in here in the projects environment. And from projects, you're going to start developing your own project numbers, mimicking what you've got in your current system. You make a new project very simply by hitting add project, and you put in some project number. Like for me today, I'm going to put in today's date as my project number, 2020-0602. The project name is going to be HIVE PAL Webinar. You don't have to put a project name. You only have to give it a project number. I recommend giving it a project name. Makes life a little easier. If you want to have some of the dates show up, you can also put in issue dates here. Oh yeah, this project is due on whatever this day is here, the 26th of June. Okay. You can put other stuff in here like who the owner is. You can do what the phase of the project is if you want to. This is all if you want to. You can decide what office it's coming out of if you want to do some filtration based on that. But in this case, project number is all that's required. And I hit next. That actually saves it. You can choose to forcibly add paths here. I am going to recommend you skip this. In fact, at this point, you can just close. You don't need to worry about it yet. You can come back and add permissions and add paths later. Just close it. That gives you a bucket, which is that project. And if I refresh this page, I should have today's date here on this page, 2020-0602 right there, HIVE PAL Webinar. There it is. My access level right now is I'm a manager. It's telling me what my access level is on this page. So I can do whatever I need to this project. For the paths, for associating paths to this project, I rarely recommend anybody go to add paths and manually type in some kind of file path here. Just don't. People often put the wrong path, especially if you're dealing with BIM 360 projects. Just don't do that. It is an option, but I don't recommend you take it. This is what I recommend you do. I recommend after you have this bucket, this project made. In fact, in my case, for today's example, I'm going to use this MEP project right here because this one I believe I have some paths that needs to get mapped. The project number 2020-0510. That's what I'm going to use for today's example. So this particular project right here, I'm going to go over to my paths and I'm going to go to my unmapped paths. Mapped paths and unmapped paths are the file path locations that the HIVE PAL recognizes as having been opened and logged into the system. When you go to unmapped paths, these are the paths that you know that HIVE Project Activity Logger already knows about. And this one right here, my MEP Productivity Pack coming out of BIM 360, this path and all models in that path, I want this to be associated to a project. Specifically, that one that we just looked at, 2020-0510. In fact, the cool thing here, if I start typing things in, 2020, for example, it'll start giving me a list of projects that are related to that. And I can either continue 05 and it'll continue to filter, 1, and it'll go, oh yeah, 10 and 19, but I can simply pick the one that's actually supposed to be associated to and hit save. And what it will do is make that association. It will map that path. It hasn't refreshed this page yet, but if I go back to my projects and I go into that MEP project here, edit this, and I go to my paths, I'll see a bunch of paths, and one of them will be that BIM 360 MEP Productivity Pack 2019 path. It's ready to go. I didn't have to type anything out. I didn't have to screw up a path, accidentally type a backslash when it should have been a forward slash like this guy is. None of that. The path was known. I mapped it directly to my project, and now any models associated to this path or any of these other paths that are in the mix here, any of those models will be associated directly to this project right here, this 2020-0510 project set. And I do have a lot of models. In my case, I had some local archives of these projects, and I wanted to track them as well. And I've got the original BIM 360 models up in BIM 360. I wanted to track those, all a part of the same project. And so now I can do that. As those paths came in, as I recognized those paths, and they were in my unmapped list, I simply checked all of those, the ones that I have here for the MEP productivity pack. They were all checked in one step. Check, 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 check. And I said, associate to this project right here. And just now, I had recently opened up some BIM 360 paths, and I wanted to make sure they were mapped. This now is mapping just fine. So once I've got that, I don't have to even save this because this was just edited off of something that's already there, but in case I made a change, I guess I'll save. But that now, on that model, that project collection, all of those BIM 360s and local files are all mapped to this project logically. Okay. I have seen questions roll in about this before, about can I reassociate a path to another project? So let's say, for example, in the future, this project, this MEP Productivity Pack 2019.1.0, maybe there's a new version, a project model comes back up, and I want to leave it right where it is, and I want that path to be now mapped to a new project number. Can I do that? Sure you can, but know this. A path can only be mapped to a project. It's a one-to-one, one path to a project. You can't have a path mapped to 3 or 4 different projects. That doesn't work out so well. So if I need to reassociate this, what I can do is I can grab that path that was associated here, this BIM 360 MEP Productivity Pack 2019, and I can delete that path from here. Now, all those records that were originally associated to this project, they go away. I can save this. Now, the records, actually, I should rephrase that. They don't go away. They disassociate from this project, which is okay. Not a big deal. I can go back down to my HIVE PAL webinar project right here. Well, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go to unmapped because I want to do this the right way here. Looks like it hasn't refreshed just yet. Let's refresh this page. Hasn't disassociated. I would just simply find that checkbox again once it shows up back here, check that box, and then reassociate it to the next project. So, yeah. All right. There was a question about why my paths not show up in this list. And we'll talk about that at the end today as we talk about some of the troubleshooting things you can do. We'll come back to that. Okay, with the setup of this, I've gone to settings, I've checked my options, I know what's logging, I've got my config, I've installed PAL everywhere in my office and put that config file on all those computers in the right location. They're logging stuff. I'm seeing paths begin to show up here. I've gone to projects, I've made some projects, and I've gone back to my unmapped paths and associated them to my projects. I'm now ready to start reaping the benefits from all of this effort that I've just sown into the Hive environment. And it really wasn't that much effort. It was making a couple of projects, and I can improve upon them later if I care about more data. And I've made some mappings of some paths. That's really the baseline effort there. Once I have that, I can jump over into my dashboard. And in the dashboard, there's a number of things that are dependent upon the project activity logger. I'm going to show you each of the reports that are dependent on the PAL, the Hive PAL. In Enterprise, Revit versions and Revit add-ins both are directly dependent upon the project activity logger submitting to the Hive system those add-ins. If you choose in project settings here not to log Revit add-ins, then of course on the Enterprise Revit add-ins, you're not going to get Revit add-ins because you won't have logged that. You can always turn it on later, and add-ins will start rolling in as you check that on. You can change your mind again whenever. Revit versions, however, this will come in no matter what. You can kind of see machine by machine which Revit versions and subversions even are installed on those computers and when those were last opened. We'll take a look at something that's coming soon on the project side related to this as well. Because really, why might you want to know this? Well, you might want to know this just for basic IT maintenance. but really on the project environment, model by model, you care which subversions, which updates of Revit were used on a project, especially recently. If there are people working on the same version of Revit or same model in Revit with different subversions of Revit itself, that's a huge issue. You can cause corruption yourself that way. So we'll take a look at where you might find that in the near future here. Over here on the overview, in projects, everything else here in projects all comes from the project activity logger, all of it. So in enterprise, versions, Revit versions and Revit add-ins comes from PAL. In projects, everything here comes from PAL. Okay, the overview is just designed to give you quick insight into what's going on in your firm. If I look over here at this project model, this file here is saved on my C drive in my working directory for the starter project for the MEP productivity pack. Is a 701 meg model. It's one of my top 10 largest models in my firm in the last 60 days. That's kind of important to know, right? And this goes all the way down the list. There's other projects that are large inside of here, but I care about the top 10 largest models across my whole firm. This is project agnostic. This is just what are the top 10 largest models that have been logged into PAL. And this tells me that information. I can also see over here projects that are approaching deadlines. How close are they coming? With the most recent or most current one being on top. And in this case, you can see I have not updated this particular project's deadline in a little while. I'm past its deadline. That tells me I should probably approach that team and see when that next major deadline is on the horizon so I can mark that so this thing can give me some indication of what's going on. I like knowing that personally because I've noticed within about 2 weeks, 14 working days, give or take, 10 working days, I should say, 14 total linear days. Within about 2 weeks of deadlines, especially in architectural firms, that's when things sometimes start going a little sideways, especially if it's a major deadline. Why is that? Because in the world of architecture, I think in school, we're actually taught in one of our classes that as long as you've got 24 hours, you have enough time. So I think we're trained to be the world's best procrastinators. What that means is within about 2 weeks of a deadline on large projects especially, we start grabbing people from all over the firm. Hey, get on this project, help me do these things, pick up these red lines, do this stuff, I got to meet deadline, whatever, right? And we throw people on a project and everybody works in different ways and they're unfamiliar with the project environment. So while this doesn't tell me that's what's happening, this tells me that might be coming up. And maybe you've got a different buffer. Maybe yours is 1 week, maybe yours is 3 weeks. It's up to you. So for you, you can just kind of like look at this and go, oh yeah, this is meaningful. Now, if you don't want to use project dates, just don't. Just ignore that. Just ignore that. For right now, you don't have the ability to remove the report, but just ignore it because it's not meaningful for you. But if you are using these and you want to get that benefit, then fill the dates out and you'll start seeing when things get close and just mouse over and it'll tell you how many days you are away from that deadline. It doesn't tell you what the deadline is. Again, it just says that's the deadline, that's how far away I am, but then I can know if I have to give it some love. Okay, moving on. Top 10 projects by hours down here. How much time has been spent? Now, my little data set here, guys, I don't do a lot of production in Revit. Most of my time is spent demoing and not actually doing a lot of saving. But with that, you can see that even so, there are individuals in my firm who have been spending time in the models, and I can see which projects it was they've invested their time in. Top 10 projects by how many hours have been invested. Those are projects that sometimes when they are the largest models in the last 30 to 60 days, I may very much care about, you know, the health of the models in those projects. I might decide as a BIM manager to give them some more love. This is not actual logged like Deltek Vision hours. This is how much time have these models been open on Revit workstations between open and save. Open with no save, open and then maybe it's open for 4 days and then just closed without saving. That's not time in the model because there was no production done. This is open to save and close time. That's what this is logging. I can also see my top 10 contributors in my firm. And again, guys, I'm a small company. I'm 20 people. Most of my team is developers. Most of my people aren't working live in Revit doing any production. You can see here that Chris and myself are the top 2 users where we're actually opening up models, doing anything, and doing any kind of save, right? Wyatt C, obviously here in green, the little sliver, that's a little bit of work that he's done in Revit. But we're not a production company. You're going to see a lot more time from your users in your firm, and you'll see kind of who the top users of Revit are. Now, sometimes you might use this to figure out if a person who's in Revit and opening models is saving when they shouldn't be, and they're leaving models open all week long or all weekend long, because if they open up on a Monday and they save and close on a Friday, that's all week from 8 a.m. Monday to 5 p.m. Friday of working time according to this system. That might be an indication to you that that person might need some training if you're not expecting them to be in the model that much time. But again, this is top 10 contributors over X amount of time. If I scroll down this page, you can also see a sync to central duration across the whole firm. Okay? Looking at this, this is in seconds, by the way. You can do the math if you need to get minutes. But over here, I can see that there are some of my syncs to central that were near instantaneous. It wasn't even long enough to register time. But many of my other syncs were actual times. Now, in my case, my numbers are in the sub 200 second range, sub 4 minutes. In your case, you might be in the 4 minute to 20 minute sync to central time. You know, this one here, this project saved on BIM 360, saved in 114 seconds. It's just about 2 minutes. Over here, I'm also getting open durations, how long projects took to open. And I see one of my projects here took a really long time. It's an outlier. It took, I don't know what that is, 20 minutes to open? That's a long time. That's kind of silly that it took that long, mind you. And I think what the problem was somebody was sitting on a page that was basically waiting for them to, be prompted. But that's kind of an indication to me that, maybe need to talk to people or about how their projects open, and maybe they're selectively opening and maybe they're not selectively opening, and maybe they're just like opening and walking away and not actually doing anything. Well, that might be good for me to know. But this kind of generally gives me the idea of, what the open time is on models across the whole firm in the past 30 to 60 days. Let's start digging in though to specific projects, right? I want to know stuff about a model. I go to this project right here. This is the one that I do most of my work in. I can see who's working on this project. Again, this is the one that I haven't updated my issue date. It's a couple days ago here, almost 2 weeks ago. How much total time has been spent on it? How many models are a part of this project? How many people? How much time has been spent in hours inside those models? How big are the models in that project? In this case, the top 10 largest models, or actually all the models in this project organized biggest to small. I can see in this case, this project's largest model is about 60 meg. Not something for me to be concerned about. I'm good. There are other projects in the mix here. If I wanted to isolate, was it this guy here? Yeah, this is the one, that's the MEP Productivity Pack. It's got a little while before it's issued here. We're noticing that we've got 701 meg model as the biggest, and then the smallest model here is 34 meg. It's pretty divergent. Maybe this model here needs some love to be cleaned up a bit. It's a starter project. It's a little bit bloated. Maybe I want to clean that down. Maybe I want to purge some things out, right? But this gives me some indication of some of the models that maybe I want to look at and some of the models that maybe don't need as much love. But it kind of gives me just quick early indicators of what's going on here. All right. And also who's spending their time in those models. Now, some of these pages here are coming soon. Model summary, model performance detail, some of the warnings there. Some of these pages are coming soon, and actually they're coming in about 30 days. I say that because just because they're coming soon doesn't mean you shouldn't be installing the project activity logger to start getting data. When these reports come, the data will start showing up inside of here. The summary here just gives you some basic information, will give you some basic information about the model. It will talk about, how many loaded families and how many are unplaced, how many rooms or spaces you've got, and those that are unplaced or unenclosed, and some basic numbers like that. Breakdown of how many floor plan, ceiling plan, 3D views you've got, just kind of a basic breakdowns of data in that model summary right there. Again, it's coming soon. It's not quite ready for your eyes yet. It'll be out very shortly, and when it shows up, when you click to model summary, it'll just like, oh, magically I've got reports here. And you can start filtering through those models and seeing some basic information. The model performance, though, this is the one that we wanted to make sure you had instantly. This is one of those reports that right away when you're working inside of here, you're probably going to go here pretty quickly. because this here, if I click on this project, this is the one that I use most regularly. This model right here is the architectural model that I do most of my demonstrations from in 2018. In fact, I'll open this up a little later today and show you what that looks like when this thing logs data. You'll notice here, I'm seeing the sync to central time for this model across its history since I've been using this new HIVE PAL. Over here to the right, I'm seeing the open duration. You might notice here, based on the tick marks and the quantity of ticks here, that I open the model way more frequently than I actually save this model. I very rarely save, but I very often open for demonstrations and then close without saving. You can kind of see that from how this is working here. In your firms, you're probably going to have fewer opens than you are saves, because people most likely will be saving throughout the day. And so you'll get those different save intervals. You can also see the model warnings down here. And this, for me, paired with the open duration and the sync to central duration and the model warnings, all three of those working together generally can give me a feel for how this project is performing. If I know this model is coming up close to a deadline, and if I'm seeing my file open durations do what you're seeing right here, where it's getting higher and higher and higher over time, and if I'm seeing a consistent sync to central getting higher and higher and higher over time, that's meaningful to one degree. But where I really start getting concerned myself is when I start seeing also model warnings getting higher and higher and higher, and those aren't getting higher and higher in collaboration with the actual file size, right? This is a 56 meg model, 60 meg model we'll call it. In this case, I've got 36 warnings in this project, and it's been pretty stable. There was one point when it actually got down to 23 warnings, and then it jumped back up again because probably I did something and I undid something. But regardless, I'm seeing that this is fairly stable. So even if the file open duration is rising here for me and what I know about my projects, that's okay. I expect that because there's more detail in the model. But my warnings aren't also substantially increasing. My sync to central time once in a while is a little higher, but it's not unreasonable. 8-second sync to central, 9-second sync to central, nobody cares. But if you're starting to get into like the 600, 800, 1200, 2400 sync to central durations consistently, and you're starting to see your model warnings increase, especially if you know the file size is like 60 meg in my case, if I'm seeing more than 120 warnings, to me, that's an early indicator that I might have some problems, and I want to take a look at that. And so I might start giving that project some love, especially if it's getting close to a deadline. All right? These things are all indicators that work together to give you some data. In the future, you'll also be able to see, in the model performance detail, which is also coming soon here, you'll be able to kind of see a comparison of syncs to central, file open durations, number of warnings, what computer the person was working on and what their system specs are, how they were connected to the network. This is all information that silently behind the scenes, the system logs to your company, and only you get access to this in this environment. And by the way, a common question that rolls in is, where is this information being stored and what kind of system is this running on? This is running on Microsoft Azure. It's being stored in the Microsoft Azure cloud. It's authenticated using Azure Active Directory. So it's a very secure environment. In fact, it's actually the secure environment that the government projects are actually allowed to run on themselves in a lot of cases. So this is U.S. government, I say specifically, by the way. But I don't know about other governing agencies. But this is a very secure environment. It is tested. It is constantly being, checked for any kind of holes, and those are fixed if any are even found. So this is designed to be a secure place for you to store and track this kind of information. And here's the deal. Open and save times are not mission critical things for anybody else looking to get secure information, right? Like, oh, it took 8 seconds to open and save. That's a big deal, right? It doesn't matter. If you don't feel like storing any extra project information in the project side, just put a project number. Project number and model names aren't really that very identifying. That's okay. It's not storing, what exactly the data is in the model. It's storing metrics for you to understand how the model is performing. That's key. How often does this information update here? How quickly does it come back in? Well, it's about a 5-minute cycle. You do a sync to central, within about 5 minutes, this report will be up to date, give or take. Let me give an example. If I refresh this page here, I'm noticing that right now my titles down here aren't exactly what I was expecting. Let me refresh this and get date stamps on this instead. Every once in a while, I notice my page will not always refresh right away. So we'll get this. There we go. There's my date stamps that I was expecting to see. With this information here, what I'm going to do is open up and sync a model in Revit 2018. In fact, the exact model we were just looking at. I'm going to go through the exercise of open. I'm going to browse to where my projects are, which is right here. There's my architectural 2018 project, creating a new local like I should be. I'm not going to check audit. I'm going to open this up, opening all work sets, so I don't have to wait for that page. Overwrite my existing local. Do all the things that I would normally do. As a normal Revit end user, this is no different. But while I'm opening this up, right now, this open time is being logged to the HIVE cloud system. Today, on 6/02, so June 2nd. And as I'm in here and I sync to central, in this case I haven't made any changes yet, but when I first open up the project, if I'm going to do production, one of the first things I do, just to make sure I've got a good handshake with that model, is I sync to central. Make sure I got all the latest and greatest stuff, and then I do production, and I work all day long, and I sync, every couple hours or whatever your frequency is. As I do that, if I go back to that website right now, and if I refresh right now, I may not instantly get all of that information. Okay, if I go here and I go grab that project, in this case, no, it's got to refresh again. Control-Shift-R, refresh. Actually, I might just resize my page and get it to kind of show that latest date. I've got a dev build of this right now, and this is kind of pushing off my page. But let's see here. Yeah, of course it's going to do that again. There we go. So yeah, this is still showing me 5/11 right now. My last sync to central, 5/28 was my last open. In about 5 minutes, when I refresh, that save and open from today will manifest in this system. I just have to wait a little bit. It's not instantaneous, but pretty close. When someone calls you up and is like, hey, how come my project's opening so slowly? Usually because it took a while, and by the time you get to that page, the data will probably be there. Okay. Do users in fact, let me do this here. I want to talk about how you can get your hands on this, and then I'm going to jump into some of the more deep questions that I've seen roll through that didn't fit really well into the flow of what I wanted to talk about here, but I'm going to answer those questions in just a minute here. How do you get your hands on this suite, on these new things? If you don't have the new Hive right now, how do you get it? Well, if you go to ctcsoftware.com, ctcsoftware.com, you go to products, you go to Hive, you get started. Here, there's an article. Click here for the updated Hive installation. So if you're using the older Hive, or if you don't have Hive at all yet, you want to get it, well, of course, you can try Hive free for 14 days. But if you already have Hive and you just want the latest installer, or you want the latest installers in general, click here. This will bring you to a page that helps you get that latest installer. In fact, right here is the download for the CTC Hive 2021. Okay. Very shortly here, we're actually releasing an update to this. So many of you who have it, some of the issues that I see rolling through in questions, I'm going to reference the update that's coming out like today. So you guys know that you can get that. All right. So with that, thank you all again, and we'll talk with you in a future webinar.